we do have a short talk tonight by Steve Gonzales. Some of you know Steve. He's been on the radio a lot with Pat McGran on his radio program. Steve is a professor of constitutional law and a co-founder of the Phoenix School of Law. Steve is also a legal analyst for PBS, NPR, CNN, Time Magazine, ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox News. Steve has been and is still currently a representative of the Baha'i Faith to the United Nations. Steve grew up in Michigan, but he's been here. He has 3 children, a psychologist, a lawyer, and an honor student. So please welcome Steve Gonzales.
Welcome again, everybody here. This is a time of happiness and joy. The Scottsdale Baha'i community. I actually live in Phoenix, so I'm kind of leaking over the border here. But I know the Scottsdale Baha'i community is very proud as well. They should be for their new Baha'i Center here, and very honored that our guests would be here today. I'm not going to take too much of your time. I think actually the professor there was given a long hook just in case I go too long. I think that's the real reason why he's staying on the stage, actually. And it also should, as is always the case, you know, when something like this happens, there's all kinds of people behind the scenes to do all the work, and they don't get recognized or any credit. And so a few people on the stage come up and smile at you, and I think that's so unfair, having been on the other side for so many years as well, too. Unfortunately, I don't have all the names, and I'm afraid that if I start naming names, I will leave people out, and I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. But there, maybe we could just give a quick round of applause for all the behind-the-scenes volunteers who worked hard, cleaned the, you know, made all the arrangements and all of that. Can we do that? And you know who you are. As Ernie mentioned, the Baha'is have actually been in Arizona for a long time, and it comes as a surprise, I think, to a lot of people, including even Baha'is, some of the connections. So I thought I'd just mention a couple of interesting points. One is, now there's still has to be a lot of research done on this, so it's not clear, and the connection is just that she happened to pass through Arizona, but I think it's cool. The president of the United States' daughter, who nearly a century ago was heavily influenced by Baha'i teachings. We're talking about President Woodrow Wilson. His daughter Margaret came through Arizona a long time ago. And there is some research showing that she was influenced heavily by the Baha'i teachings of world unity. And that may have well been, had an effect on the President Wilson's formulation of the 19th point of, or the 14th point, if I remember right, of the League of Nations, because it is so in tune with Baha'i teachings. It is known for a fact that his daughter, Margaret, was very good friends with a very well-known Baha'i, an American Baha'i, who happened to be married to a Baha'i Persian descent who lived in Washington, D.C. at that time. And it's also known that President Wilson had Baha'i books in his library. In fact, one was eventually turned over to the Library of Congress. So there's some real research tending to back that up. I thought another very interesting little connection between Arizona and the Baha'is of the world, because, you know, the Baha'is are, it's a worldwide faith, and it's surprising to a lot of people, I think, when the more you learn about it. But there was a Baha'i from my home state, Michigan, who married a fella, an engineer, a long time ago. This was maybe 80 years ago, probably, something close to that, and moved out west here. And her husband developed a very interesting new way of abstracting materials in mining, particularly copper. And She was a Baha'i, her husband was not, but he was very, very supportive all his life of the Baha'i faith. He actually founded some of the major efforts of what we now know as BWV mining. And he became the founder of what was at one time Phelps Dodge, and is now Freeport McMoran. You can see downtown the big building of Freeport McMoran. It's little known that that was actually owned by a Baha'i. And what's even less known is that a great deal of the important funding in the early days of the 20th century of Baha'i efforts around the world came from Arizona, because they were very wealthy and they spent a lot of money helping donate, particularly in the land of Israel. Many of the Baha'i, most important Baha'i buildings in the world on Mount Carmel in Israel were directly funded by Bisbee, Arizona, as well as in Latin America and in other places. Some of the best known Baha'i schools were directly funded by that great Baha'i Amelia Collins, known as Millie Collins. And in fact, those of you who have had the opportunity to go to the Holy Land, to Israel, and visit the Baha'i gardens, as they're sometimes called, in Haifa, you know that there's a gate, the main gate that you pass through, a black kind of wrought iron gate that is named the Millie Collins Gate after her. So there is a bond. Now, there certainly are other important stories I could tell you of very significant Baha'is who have lived here in Arizona. But that one in particular, I think, touches an emotional chord to Baha'is, because it directly connects Baha'is to the world center of the faith in Israel. There are other surprises, and what I thought I'd do is just share a few of those with you that you might not realize. Maybe you do. And it's been a while now, but in the, I think it was in the late 80s or early 90s, I've forgotten the exact year, the Encyclopedia Britannica actually pointed out, and it's still there, that the Baha'i faith is actually the second most widespread faith in the world. It is not, now we're not talking about numbers, we're talking about geographical distribution. Baha'is are everywhere. But because Baha'is don't proselytize, and try and convert other people, you've probably known Baha'is and don't realize it. Now, it doesn't mean we're afraid to tell people about our faith, of course not. But one of the basic principles of Baha'i faith is to try and live your life and transform yourself and set an example. Because it's so easy to go around and say, here, do it my way. And that doesn't do much. Now, many of us, I know, particularly here in Scottsdale, who have become familiar with the Baha'i faith in more recent days, may be under the misimpression that the Baha'i faith is populated heavily by just people of any particular ethnic group, particularly, of course, people of Persian descent. While that is certainly a major important part of the population of the Baha'i community, if you're not a Baha'i, you might not realize that that's a misimpression. For example, I grew up in Michigan, and I think there was one Persian Baha'i family there, and it was Michigan, Wisconsin. There were Baha'i communities there that were over a century old in that area. Kenosha, Wisconsin, for example, and they reflect the population distribution of that area. If you visit the Baha'is in Atlanta or South Carolina, you're going to find a very heavy group of Baha'is who are African American. I remember meeting with, and I don't remember how it came up, but this was decades ago, with lawyers in Michigan, young lawyers who had just come back from Bolivia. They were in some type of a project. And they were absolutely convinced, they were shocked to learn I was a Baha'i, because they thought the Baha'is were all Bolivian Indians. Well, it's a common assumption. It just so happens there's a lot of Bolivian Indians that are Baha'is. In fact, places that you might not realize, India, very high percentage Baha'i. In fact, the Baha'i House of Worship in Bahapur, India, receives more visitors yearly than the Taj Mahal, according to India's own statistics. It's not a Baha'i claim, it's a national statistic. Vietnam, the Congo region, very heavy Baha'i populations, percentages. Guyana, here in the Western Hemisphere. Of course, what happened here in America was, after the Iranian Revolution in the late 70s, many of the Baha'is had to flee Iran. And the sad history of the faith is that it has been persecuted in Iran and a few other countries, alternatingly, sometimes really bad, sometimes not so bad. Unfortunately, with the new regime of 1979, 1980, that era, it became very bad. And so what happened was, America, as it has always done, opened its arms and welcomed these refugees to come here for asylum. And naturally, of course, they would settle with the relatives and families in the neighborhoods where they would feel comfortable. Some of them were elderly, they didn't speak English, they needed help. They needed help with navigating, America's bureaucracy, all of that. And so there, as America has always done, tended to be clusters of populations. Well, if you happen to be near that population, you would get that misimpression. My own high school, there were 7 teachers in my little blue-collar suburban Detroit high school, 7 teachers who were Baha'is. None of them of any particular, wide variety of backgrounds. My own high school, I became a Baha'i many, many years ago as a teenager. We had something like 30 or 40 Baha'is just in that high school, youth. And in fact, we had, over a 4 or 5 year period, we had something like 500 people, mostly young people, become Baha'is in a very short time. This was early 70s, late 60s, that era. The point I'm trying to make here is that there's a wide variety of Baha'i. So if you travel the world and look up the Baha'is, the amazing thing is that you will find Baha'i communities, for example, in Japan, you name the place. But the even more amazing thing is that the unity of the teachings of the Baha'i faith. You talk to a Baha'i in Tokyo, in New Delhi, in Caracas. I know, I've been there. You name the place, and the teachings are the same. There's no first church of the Baha'i this or that. It's one faith. It has never split. Never. And that's something unique in the history of religion. For nearly 2 centuries, it has stayed on course without any clergy. Because you see, there are no priests, mullahs, ministers. There's no spiritual, that type of an officer. The affairs of the faith are run by administrative bodies, democratically elected by secret ballot, and the mere fact that you happen to serve on a local or a national or an international body does not confer any spiritual station. Like, for example, a priest or a minister or something like that. Basically, it's hard work. It's just administrative work is what it is. And this, which Baha'is call part of at least, Baha'is call the covenant, is what has had such an incredible effect of just an internal, there's no force, it's just a day-to-day internal living, trying to strive to be a better person, trying to transform and reach for a higher character. And isn't that what all of the great faiths are about? The basic principles of the Baha'i faith are actually very simple, and yes, they are shared by other faiths. Of course they are. The basic principles are the oneness of mankind. All humanity is one family. The equality of the sexes is one of the most fundamental principles of the Baha'i Faith. It has always been. It is one of the founding principles. Now, that's not saying a lot right now, but in the early 19th century, to be promoting the equality of the sexes in some parts of the world, especially Central Asia, where the Baha'i Faith started, didn't make you all that popular. Something was certainly in the air there in the early 19th century. In fact, one of the greatest of the early Baha'is, named Tahirih, is famed for taking off the forced veil in Iran in 1848. 1848, publicly saying we don't have to be forced to wear this anymore. That same summer, just a few weeks later, on the other side of the world, in Seneca Falls, New York, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Matilda Jocelyn Gage convened the first women's rights convention in the world, in world history. The Baha'is, that's not a coincidence. It's the spirit of the age. One of the most important principles the Baha'is have actually died for is the equality of the sexes. The first Baha'i of the Western Hemisphere in history was a Civil War officer for the Union who was one of the few who accepted to command African Americans. The very first person. And now, Baha'is do not condone or want war, but Civil War, slavery, that was something special. And he was a very, very special, pure-hearted man. Baha'is also revere the concept of the oneness of all the great religions. And that's why Baha'is come from all different backgrounds, not only ethnically, but religious. I was raised Catholic, like typical Mexican family. Baha'is I've met, the first time I heard about the Baha'i Faith was from a young Jewish Baha'i. A wonderful, wonderful person, actually. I still honor him. You name the religious background, Zoroastrian, Buddhist, Christian, all the denominations, there's a Baha'i in there somewhere. We talked about the Hatfield. Honest truth. Years ago, I met a Hatfield, young Hatfield, and a young McCoy at a Baha'i school who were married. Absolute truth. And they were wonderful, and they loved it. And actually, I have a colleague at Phoenix School of Law, Professor Hatfield, who, a very dear friend of mine, who is also a descendant, by the way, of the same family. So I couldn't resist mentioning that. We'll have to get a Khrushchev and a Kennedy, and find some others there that set examples. But the point here, the bottom line that we're trying to get at, I think, is that Baha'is revere all the great religions of the world and see Moses, Abraham, Moses, Christ, Buddha, Muhammad, and the founders of the Baha'i Faith, the Bab and Baha'u'llah, as being of exactly equal. That God speaks to us through prophets in different ages. And the message is renewed just in the exact same way, by analogy, not literally, that the sun rises again and it's a new day. And sets, and then a new one comes. It's not a coincidence to Baha'is. So we are celebrating here renewal, springtime, what Baha'is see as a spiritual springtime. We are so deeply honored that our guests are here. We want to collaborate, we want to volunteer. Baha'is are about social and economic development, as Ernie said. Without getting paid, we are volunteers. Especially for our community leaders and our brothers and sisters of other faiths, we want to be there for you if you need support. support, if you are feeling persecuted, you name what happens to Baha'is. Let me tell you, in the when the Martin Luther King Day celebration was not being recognized at all, it was the Baha'is in Atlanta, and Mrs. King herself has publicly said this on repeated occasions, that arose to champion the cause, and that led to the spread of Martin Luther King Day around the country, with asking nothing in return. So, yes, we're proud of our history. We're a young faith, very young. Barely 2 centuries approximately or so, but a lot of nice people. So, now, as I mentioned, I think there's a big hook over here. I don't want to have it be pulled off the stage. I love to tell a story of my first case as a lawyer many, many years ago, before I was a professor and before I was a judge. When I got very first case as a prosecutor, when you're very young, was I was given a case of a fishing without a license back in Michigan. I'm sure some of you have heard this story, you've heard me tell it before. Well, what's the main piece of evidence? Of course, it's a fish. Well, it's summer back then. There was no air conditioning in that courthouse in Michigan, sweltering hot, and of course, the main piece of evidence is melting. Filling the courtroom with the aroma of 6-month-old bass. And I started talking faster and faster, and the judge, I'll never forget the judge looking through the corner of his eye at that bass sitting there. He's like, why is that sitting there? And I don't think I won. I'm sure I lost that case. So I try to keep that in my heart, you know, don't talk too much. So I will conclude and again, welcome you all. Thank you on behalf of the Scottsdale Baha'i community and the spiritual assembly of the Baha'is of Scottsdale, even though I'm from Phoenix. And please enjoy yourself, get to know each other, not just the Baha'is, but everybody here. It's a wonderful, wonderful gathering, and I think the beginning of some very, very exciting collaboration. Thank you all very much.